Like, why would you start a movement that the entire basis is on is that this guy raised from the dead if he really didn't? Hey, welcome to this week's episode of Ask the Pastor. This is our weekly segment where we expand upon our Sunday sermon and go in a little more in depth to either our passage or just answer any questions that you may have that come out of these stories. This past week was Easter, and in Easter we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus Christ inside the Christian church. And it really begs the question, and one that was sent in, and why I think we need to talk about it is, did Jesus really raise from the dead? Because obviously that's what the Bible says and proposes that, but does history say that? And more importantly, is there things that without a doubt prevent that from happening? Now, starting with the Gospels, the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all of them record Jesus raising from the dead and appearing to disciples. And one that kind of went with this is, why didn't Jesus appear to more people after his resurrection? Like, why didn't he appear to Pilate or appear to Caesar, like the most powerful leader of the day? Like, why didn't he just appear to that guy? And then in history, we'd have recorded that he appeared to him and then nobody would debate it. But Jesus didn't just appear to a few people. If you actually go in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, Paul talks about this, that he first appeared to Peter of the disciples, because Mark tells us that he appeared to Mary Magdalene and women before anyone else. But he appeared to Peter, and then it says then he appeared to the 12, which was 11 at that time, because Judas had betrayed him. But then it says, and Paul writes this in here, that then he appeared to 500 more brothers and sisters. Jesus appeared to a lot of people in those 40 days. People saw him. People took that message. And Paul said at his writing that some of them were still alive even today who testified to seeing the risen Jesus Christ. Now think about that for a second. Yes, social media was invented. Yes, no one took a picture and a selfie with Jesus and said #RisenKing or something like that. But 500 people of what Paul claims saw a risen Jesus, and then they took that message to the world around them. That's a pretty big deal there. And why it's so important that I think we say that is if Jesus didn't raise from the dead, and all of a sudden you have people going around the known world like Peter and Paul and the different apostles and the church starting in this movement that is all about Jesus raising from the dead. If that didn't happen, then people would have disproved them pretty early. We'd have more counter arguments than the Bible saying that these guys were lunatics, that they were crazy, that they just made stuff up, it was a cult, and it would have been squashed from the start. Like, why would you start a movement that the entire basis is on is that this guy raised from the dead if he really didn't? Because that's why the resurrection honestly is so important, which kind of leads to our next question. Okay, Jesus, we think he raised from the dead. I believe he raised from the dead. Christianity believes it because it hasn't been disproven. Instead, it's been proven through the scriptures of those who saw it, and this message is still endured. But why it is so important is because if you can prove that the resurrection never happened, then all of Christianity comes down like a house of cards. Now think about that for a second. That's a pretty heavy thing to put a sentiment on. If Jesus didn't raise from the dead, then all of Christianity is false. Then us gathering on Sundays is completely worthless. That 2,000 plus years of church history all falls aside because if he didn't raise from the grave, then he is not God. Then he should not be worshipped, meaning this entire religion is a farce. But that's not the case. Instead, Jesus did raise again, which is the foundation of everything the Old Testament looked to and everything the New Testament built off of, is that linchpin hinge event in all of human history that Jesus, by him raising from the dead, showed he was God, fulfilled everything before him, and made everything possible after him so that he could show that he truly is God and that we can truly have a new life in him. Now, that's really hard for people to accept, and like any sort of belief system, it takes that step of faith to go down that. But if you just look around our world, it's pretty hard to say that Jesus didn't change things. We talked about this a little bit on Sunday, as we mark the year we're in based on when Jesus was born. Like, it's a pretty significant event that our entire world kind of dates around that whole moral systems and governments have expanded on the foundation of the teachings of Jesus. Now, do they recognize him as Lord? Most do not, but his impact on even secular world is undeniable. And people always try to separate that, try to make Jesus seem like just some fairy tale, like it has no effect on things. But the more we learn in sciences and the complexity of things, the more we understand there is a created rule to our universe, that our universe is complex. It's not just by accident. And it seems the more and more we learn about other sciences and philosophies, and everything just points more towards supporting the truth of the Bible than dismissing it. Which just brings us back to Easter. Did Jesus rise from the dead? I believe he absolutely did. We don't have anything in history that disproves it. If they could find his body, or if they could provide a future, or if they could somehow put falsehoods on the disciples showing they were liars and they died for nothing, then this entire thing would go away. But in 2,000 years, that has never happened. And why is it so important? Because it is the foundation of all of Christianity. You take away the resurrection, the Old Testament falls aside. You take the resurrection, the New Testament is meaningless. You take away the resurrection, the church falters. But the good news is Jesus is alive. He did rise from the dead. And because of it, that's why we celebrate Easter. That's why we celebrate every Sunday and every day of the week, that we can have a new life in him. And not only is our world changed, but our personal lives are changed because of the hope we have in Jesus. Thank you guys for joining us. We'll see you next week.